A cheerful morning to everyone. Today, let's see the topic language as a psychological system. When we speak one language, we agree that words are representations of ideas, people, places, and events. The given language that children learn is connected to their culture and surroundings. But can words themselves shape the way we think about things? Psychologists have long investigated the question of whether language shapes thoughts and actions, or whether our thoughts and beliefs shape our language. There is a saying, thanks to language, man became man by Descartes. So now the question comes, what is language? All the living creatures, except human beings, they don't communicate with language. So animals' communication is unchanging and it's stereotype. A human baby has to start from scratch and learn the language. John Locke, a 17th century philosopher, told that human mind is a tabula rasa or a clean slate waiting for impression and experience to make their recordings there. Then comes a German philosopher who belonged to the 19th century, Johann Gottfried, who emphasizes that language is too imperfect to be a divine gift. Language is a result of an instinctive impulse rather than a set of structured symbols. So it is similar to that of an embryo pressing to be born. Charles Darwin, in his Descent of Man, says that there is only a difference of degree between the language of human beings and the language of animals. Now, coming to the next point, we have Chomsky, who have analyzed in syntactic structures that language formation do not come from a memory stock that the child has the ability to generate an infinite number of well-formed sentences that were not spoken of or heard before. We know the great story of Kamala and Amala, who were born in India. They were orphans and they were raised by wolves. So their first speech uh, were not reinforced through social support because the innate impulse here dies, but they were not supported by the speech development from the very beginning of their birth. Coming to the term psycholinguistics, it is a study of the relationship between language as a network of relations of the human mind. It became as a discipline in the conference in 1951, sponsored by the Social Science Research Council. The entire approach to the study of language behavior and the emphasis on the creative aspect of the language user's ability to produce language is emphasized here. Psycholinguistic studies may be broadly classified into three types according to the following questions. The first question, how language is acquired during development, which is also called as developmental psycholinguistics. The second one is how language is comprehended. That means like how it is experimental. The third one is how language is produced. Anyone who has observed children learning languages can perceive that the process involved in the development of language learning are quite mysterious. When you analyze and interpret a baby's cries, you can notice that it is organically determined. A baby, after 3 or 4 months, it starts a babbling stage. The sounds that it produces signify something, so which are characterized as pre-linguistic sounds, which gradually progress to imitative sounds. And then when it is 12 months old, when the baby attains 1 year, the perceptive development progresses to the point where sound patterns made by others, the parents, can be reproduced. This is a stage when the physical growth gets along with the development of speech areas of both the brain and also the speech apparatus. And when the baby reaches 17 to 18 months, the child understands and responds to simple utterances and understanding. It usually precedes the production of speech, the production of new language. Before 2 years, there will be increase in vocabulary and it can form 2 or 3 word utterances. Sometimes it will be single symbol or no utterance too. After 2 years comes the analytical stage, wherein the baby puts together parts and tests them on others. Words become toys to the small baby. These words, they don't signify any meaning to the child. So this is a stage which can also be called as a trial and error stage, and the baby is amused by the play of words and their arrangements. When it reaches 3 years, the longer units of increasing complexity begin to appear, and when the baby becomes 6 years, it internalizes his or her native language and it develops an intuitive knowledge of the rules by which the acceptable sentences never used before or generated and sentences never heard before or understood. So learning continues, and this becomes a continuous process as he or she moves about in society. So the later years of childhood, 1 to 6 years, hard work should be put into learning. There is a YouTube given. You can just enjoy watching it and reflect on it. Now, coming to the issues in psycholinguistics. The first one we need to remember in mind is there is no theoretical limit to the number of new sentences that can be produced. So, an infinite number of sentences can be potentially produced. And also, we need to remember that language does not completely determine our thoughts. Our thoughts are far too flexible for that, but habitual users of language can influence our habit of thought and action. Now, the questions that stems are, how is then that a child is able to internalize this kind of capability in terms of a finite number of sentences to which the child is exposed in the process of language acquisition? Along with this is the second question. The child cannot experience all the possible sentences in a language. This means that a child, without expecting all possible sentences, is able to make a number of generalizations regarding sentences in that language. This creative aspect of the language user's abilities to be captured and explained in any study. Now then comes the third question. Is the ability to generalize restricted only to language acquisition, or is it characteristic of all human cognitive, perceptual, or even motor skills? Now the final question that comes to us is, does acquisition of a second language proceed along the same lines as that of the first language? To what extent does memory play a role in language? Now, coming to the next part. In 1950s, Chomsky thinking directly stimulated linguistic experiments in the field of language acquisition. Cognitive psychologists and computer scientists also gave a great deal of support to Chomskyan formulations in 1960s. In the middle 1970s, psycholinguistics became more a part of cognitive psychology. There came into existence more complex and competing formulations. This in turn is called also as generative grammar or semantics. The Speech Act of Christ in 1967 and Searle 1969 influenced psycholinguistics. As cognitive psychologists became more interested in discourse and text studies, interest in inferential meaning, anaphora and antecedents, interpretation of anaphoric meaning, and information processing emerged as a central area in research. During 1980s, the term recognition was made broad-based. The syntactic processing, higher order syntactic and semantic structures also came into existence. Now, coming to a new term, artificial intelligence. What does it mean? We need to remember that research in artificial intelligence has also influenced psycholinguistics. The digital computers they manipulate symbols, theoretical and methodological model for understanding intelligent behavior. The influence of artificial intelligence on psycholinguistics relates to the work on language, understanding, and knowledge representation. Computer stimulation have provided psycholinguistics a powerful tool for making their theories more explicit. One group of researchers who wanted to investigate how language influences thought compared how English speakers and the Dani people of Papua New Guinea think and speak about color. A recent review of research aimed at determining how language might affect something the color perception and suggests that it might affect language phenomena too. We need to remember that language influences the way we think, an idea which is known as linguistic determination. One recent demonstration of this phenomenon involved differences in the way that English and Mandarin Chinese speakers talk and think about time. English speakers tend to talk about time using terms that describe changes along a horizontal dimension. For example, saying something like, I'm running behind schedule or don't get ahead of yourself. While Mandarin Chinese speakers also describe time in horizontal terms, it's not uncommon to use terms associated with the vertical arrangement. For example, the past might be described as being up and the future as being down. It turns out that these differences of language translate into differences in performance on cognitive tests designed to measure how quickly an individual can recognize temporal relationships. So, does this affect how we think about something depending on the language we speak? Psychologists have identified that the computational approach has helped in clarifying the possible relationships between competence and performance theories. Language just does not limit our ability to perceive the world or think about the world. Rather, they focus our attention and thought on specific aspects of the world. For so long, people have treated words as mere labels or objects and languages as different ways of stringing words together to convey thoughts, feelings, and concepts. But language is more than that. Because of it, we can exchange complex thoughts and ideas with one another, whether it's spoken aloud or written in ink. So we also need to remember that language and culture they go together. Just like language is a psychological phenomenon. Language also changes the way we see things. There's a close relationship between language and psychology as we saw in this. Language is a symbolic tool that we use to communicate our thoughts as well as represent our cognitive processes. Language is indeed the mirror of thinking, and it's one of the ways in which we communicate our rich cognitive world. Some linguistic practices seem to be associated even with cultural values, social institutions, and psychological behavior. Language affects the way we think. For example, an English speaker would organize time from left to right, but Arabic speakers from right to left. Thank you so much for listening. Happy day to you.